This conference will now be recorded.
Your microphone's off. Welcome to Live Talk with Dr. B. Hill. We have continued guests today, and if we have guests in the audience, we just ask you use the chat button over on the right-hand side to ask any questions that you have, and we can answer them. So, Dr. B, your microphone is off, Dr. B. Oh my
You want
goodness, the same thing with you. We have Dr. Smith with us today, and we have Travis with us today, which we are very, very happy that both of them are always here and always willing to participate in our talks. And I'm going to let the two of you talk, and I'm going to be here. I'm going to shut my camera off, but you may hear me tweaking in when I have a question myself. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. B.
Thank you, Dr. B.
So, Travis, beginning Thursday in the morning, there will be over 2,000 faxes that go out every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to all the providers in the country that have signed up to do buprenorphine in the past. In other words, even though the waiver's gone, these were the physicians and providers who did sign up to do the waiver for buprenorphine, Suboxone. And there's about 40,000 offices, um, uh, and so we've gotten the entire list of fax numbers, and every 16, 17, 18 days we send out a fax to the entire list and then start over again and so forth. So we began the process of reaching out to the country this coming Thursday, and then that raises the question, okay. What's going to happen is every single day there's going to be people who will tune in. They may be friendly to what we have to say. They may be hostile to what we have to say. They may think we're a bunch of wingnuts. They may think we're a bunch of crackpots. They may think we're a bunch of nuts.
Okay.
And uh, to my way of thinking, our strongest position, we don't want to get into an argument with them. We just want to present the facts, the science. So to my way of thinking, there's several very strong bodies of scientific evidence that we should probably at least mention on a daily basis early in the show. One body of scientific evidence is the body of scientific evidence around the methylation, particularly within the promoter region of the OPRM1 gene. The other body of scientific evidence is about the disruption in the catecholamine system, the known disruption in the epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, adrenaline system. Both of those sets of scientific information, we have a series of slides on them, and so I thought what we would do is let's just start with the first one. Let's start with the DNA evidence, and let's just walk through it. And I'm open to the idea that on a um, daily basis we at least mention a couple of these articles. So Chrissy, when you get a chance, if you'll bring up the article by Nielsen. Today we'll start with Nielsen, Shorbov, Walkman 2014, Walkman 2018, and Sandoval Sierra. And Travis, to refresh your memory, the Nielsen article was back in 2009. So we're going back 14 years. Okay. And all Nielsen did was, like everybody else, take some volunteers, from the local methadone clinic and run their DNA for methylation. And Nielsen found the methylation way back in 2009. And that's really kind of the entire article. He doesn't really reach any stronger conclusions. He's not really saying cause and effect. Okay, he's just saying, hey, people that are opioid dependent are also showing methylation, particularly in the OPRM1 gene, opioid uh, uh, receptor mu1, OPRM1 gene, particularly in the OPRM1 gene. And when I first saw that, my first question was, why did the FDA see this? So, but that's really all the article says, Travis. It just says, hey, we took some people from the local methadone clinic. They volunteered. We ran their DNA. We saw the methylation. And Travis, they saw the exact same methylation that you had.
Which article is that, Dr. Smith?
That's the Nielsen article. Dr.
The
Nielsen back.
Nielsen article.
Right.
Okay,
And,
and that
and
one shows the OPRN1 gene?
all the articles, okay, Nielsen, Shorbob, Walkman, Sandoval, Sierra, they all showed the exact same methylation in the OPRM1 gene.
Okay, well, we're going to pull them up randomly, and you can talk about each one randomly, okay?
Okay. All right. Just let me know when you pull one up in case I miss it. But those are the Nielsen, the Shorbob, the Walkman 2014, the Walkman 2018, and the Sandoval Sierra. Now, Nielsen and Shorbob are kind of the most boring of the two. They basically just say, hey, we took some volunteers, we ran their DNA, they had methylation. And that's the that's the life expectancy slide. That's really all they said. But then when you get to 2014, Dr. Walkman, Eliza Walkman at Boston Medical Center, Travis, Dr. Walkman was a pediatrician, and she worked with infants that were suffering from neonatal abstinence syndrome. And what Dr. Walkman showed was that the severity of the methylation determined the severity of the symptoms. Now, you can say Walkman and Shorbob, all right, they were relatively boring articles. People with opioid dependency have methylation. Although I think that should have woke up the FDA. But Travis, by the time you get to, hey, the more methylation, the worse their symptoms of withdrawal. That should have woke up the world. So Travis, I'm curious what your thoughts are on, Nielsen, Shorbob, yeah, okay, relatively boring. But by the time you get to Walkman and the severity of the symptoms is linked to the severity of the methylation, that's when, and there on the slide right there, Travis, we're actually looking at your level of methylation, and there's the methylation within the OPRM1 gene. And Travis, if you give the FDA a mulligan, if you give them a break, if you give them a pass on, maybe missing the significance of the Nielsen and Shorbob articles, I think it's kind of difficult to give the FDA a pass on the Walkman articles, when the Walkman article said the severity of the symptoms is correlated to the severity of the methylation. That should have gotten somebody's attention, and that should have at least put some doubt into this concept of the brain disease model of addiction. So Travis, I'm curious about your thoughts on
I, the first study, I wonder why no one, especially the FDA didn't say anything. But then you go to the second one, and then you go to the third, and it's almost like it was just completely overlooked, or I don't want to say like swept under the rug, but I'm just curious to know why the FDA did not act like you're saying. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It's almost like they didn't want to see what was going on. They didn't want to do anything about it. That's just how I feel about it.
almost like a willful ignorance.
Right.
I agree with you. It's hard to explain why the FDA did absolutely nothing when Nielsen showed methylation in 2009. Shorbov showed methylation and confirmed Nielsen studies in 2011. Wachman comes out in 2014 working with neonatal abstinence syndrome with the babies, shows that the severity of the symptoms from the baby correlates with the severity of the methylation. Nobody paid any attention to the Wachman study, so Wachman went and repeated her study in 2018 and found that kind of the same thing. She found that the severity of the symptoms of the baby correlated with the severity of the methylation of the baby, but she also found that the severity of the symptoms of the baby correlated with the severity of the methylation of the mother. I mean, this is really getting into some really, really hard evidence here.
And Dr. Smith, these were babies that were born opioid. They were born with opioids in their system, correct?
Yeah, these were babies who were exposed to opioids during the pregnancy. Which, by the way, the brain disease model of addiction, that when you take a drug, you get a surge in dopamine, and therefore you want to take that drug again. The babies didn't take a drug. The babies didn't take a drug.
That's a really good point. That's a very, very good point.
Yeah, the babies didn't take a drug. I mean, the whole brain disease model of addiction really falls apart when you start talking about neonatal abstinence syndrome. So if you go and look at the literature on what the psychiatrists say about neonatal abstinence syndrome, you don't find much. You don't find much at all. In fact, what you do find in these psychiatrists, when they start talking about, oh well, there are two things. There's something called addiction, and there's something called tolerance. And you're like, yeah, and so the babies get tolerance. They don't get addiction, they get tolerance. Okay, can you explain the difference to me? You're not making any sense at all. They really don't have the ability to explain using their brain disease model of addiction. They have no ability to explain the neonatal abstinence. Now, methylation explains it perfectly. In fact, methylation determines the level of symptoms. But all bets are off in 2020. All bets are off in 2020 when in June of 2020, Jose Vladimir Sandoval Sierra publishes their study out of the University of Memphis branch. Travis, do you need to take a minute and put the phone on mute, maybe?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do, but I didn't want to. I apologize about that.
Yeah, no, I had to do the same to mine. I'd forgotten to put it on mute also.
Yeah, I forgot to put mine on mute too. I'm sorry about that.
I did the same thing. All right, so we've got Nielsen and Shorbov. Okay, interesting. People who are dependent on opioid show methylation. It really gets interesting with Wachman when, hey, the severity of the methylation determines the severity of the symptoms, both the severity of methylation in the infant and the severity of methylation in the mother correlated to the symptoms that the baby had. But then look what Sandoval Sierra did in 2020. Sandoval Sierra took volunteers from, actually this time, not the local methadone clinic. Sandoval Sierra took volunteers from the local dental clinic and said, hey, we're looking for people who are opioid naive, people who have never taken an opioid. And when you get your tooth pulled or your root canal or whatever it is you're getting done, we want to check your DNA before you take any opioids, while you're taking opioids, and after you've taken opioids. These are people who had never taken opioids before in their life. And what Sandoval Sierra showed conclusively is that the methylation in the individual came from the opioids. There's no doubt anymore. It's not open for discussion. Opioids caused the methylation. And yet still, what do we get from the FDA? Crickets. Crickets. Travis, it boggles the mind. It defies explanation.
I don't think that they, and this is my personal opinion. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I think they've already realized by now that they've made a mistake. But when it comes to a big corporation like the FDA, I don't think that they're prepared or willing to admit fault. I really don't think they're going to do that. Um, it would be too much of a liability. It would be too much of a risk for them to do so. They would no longer what's the word I'm looking for? Not valid, but they would no longer be. I can't find the word I'm looking for. Their word would not be worth anything anymore if they were to expose that they missed this for so long, and there's been all these studies, and here they are, it's 2023, and all of a sudden now they're coming out with, hey guys, we're sorry, we missed this about opioids and we were wrong. I just don't see them doing that. It's too much of a liability. But I think they know. They have to know. I just think maybe it's I don't know what you would call it, but I think by now they have to know that they've made a mistake. And if they don't, they need to pay attention to what we're talking about, because it's, like I've told you before, science doesn't lie.
Dunning-Kruger are two guys who do a lot of work with something called cognitive bias. Okay, cognitive bias is when everybody kind of believes the same thing, whether it's true or not. Okay, perfect example would be, hundreds of years ago, people believed the world was flat. Okay, well, it's not. Okay, but that's what cognitive bias is all about. Believing in things that aren't true, even when you get evidence to the contrary. So according to the theory of cognitive bias, presenting them with evidence to the contrary, it doesn't change their mind. Okay, they have the ability to basically ignore it, gloss over it, assume it's wrong. That information is wrong because their information is right. And that's the theory of cognitive bias as it comes to us from Dunning-Kruger. And one of my favorite quotes from Dunning-Kruger basically says, people who are incompetent can't know they're incompetent because they're incompetent. And I'm a little quicker to agree with Dunning-Kruger than I am with a conspiracy theory, because if it was a conspiracy theory, eventually somebody would step forward and whistleblow.
Well, I didn't mean
Somebody
it.
would.
I didn't mean it like that.
Well, no, I'm not criticizing your view at all. I'm just kind of that I do hear people say, oh, it's a conspiracy. I do hear that. I do hear that.
Oh, okay.
And my reaction is, I don't. If it was a conspiracy, we'd have a whistleblower. But if it's cognitive bias as laid out by Dunning-Kruger, it's kind of following the playbook exactly. That even as evidence mounts, they don't change their mind. A good example of cognitive bias and how deadly it can be is the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986. I don't know if just so the viewer, we can walk them through the story very quickly. It was a cold morning in January of 1986. In fact, the temperature at Cape Canaveral had gotten all the way down into the upper 20s. It was very cold, and the O-rings that are on the booster tanks, those big tanks that hold that the huge amounts of fuel, they'd never been really tested well at those temperatures. And in fact, what little evidence they had of those O-rings suggested that they failed below 60 degrees. Okay, but everybody launched anyway. Everybody launched anyway. Cognitive bias ruled the day, and they launched anyway. And space shuttle went up and had what, about 76 seconds into flight. And actually, if you look at the launch, you can see the O-ring blow at launch. There's one picture
That's the
frame.
one that blew up, right? That's the
Yeah,
one that exploded and all the
right.
astronauts lost their lives.
All 7 lost their lives. Yes, it was because
Wow.
of cognitive bias. It was cognitive bias. And cognitive bias, they still launched that shuttle that day, and that shuttle blew up, not that high off the ground. I was actually there and witnessed it. But that shuttle blew up, still, well, it was still pretty close to the ground. But that was cognitive bias. Um, and what we have here with the FDA and ASAM and SAMHSA, we have, again, cognitive bias. And it raises the question, how do you overcome cognitive bias? And the answer is you don't. You don't. We're not going to change their minds. Now, they may eventually reach the point where they change their minds. The engineers for NASA reached the point where they changed their minds when that shuttle exploded. They didn't change their minds until that shuttle exploded. And it's going to be the same thing here with us. These people are not going to change their minds and recognize the truth until the shuttle blows up. So, Travis, in reality, you and I can sit here and talk about Nielsen, Shorbaugh, Walkman, Sandoval, Sierra till the cows come home. You're not going to change the opinion of the people with cognitive bias. However, I don't think the patients have cognitive bias, Travis.
No. That's because they've been through it. Everything that we're talking about here. They've been through it. They've lived it. So I mean, and they can, just like I told you, whenever I got my blood work back from the Smith test, and then everything was explained to me, it was like a light bulb went off in my head, and it just all made sense. Like all the puzzle pieces that were missing before that, and I just wasn't sure about what they were telling me. When it was explained to me, and I saw it on that graph, and I saw it from my blood work myself, it was just like, wow, like this makes sense. This is exactly what's been going on here. I mean, it's science, but it's also a lot of common sense. And that's where I don't understand why they can't see what's going on here, because, and maybe they just don't have it. You know, like you said, it's ignorance, but, and maybe they have a lack of common sense as well, because, I mean, it's basically common sense. Once you see the catecholamines, and once you see the results from that, and then all the science behind it, it's pretty much 2 and 2 equals 4 from that point. So, I mean, I guess you're right. It's just incompetence.
Let's use the term cognitive bias because it's less judgmental. Because if I
Cognitive
don't
bias. Yeah, we'll use that.
if I don't restrict myself to saying cognitive bias, I'll end up calling these guys a bunch of incompetent idiots that have killed a bunch of people, and then I'll start cursing. So it's just better off if I just stay with the word cognitive bias.
Cognitive bias. Okay.
Otherwise, Chrissy and B are going to be bleeping me out. I don't think Chrissy has a bleeper.
Yeah, we
So,
don't need that.
yeah, we don't need that. But Travis, I'm not going to claim I get as angry as you do when I think about what these guys have done. But I do get angry when I think about what these guys have done. But Travis, in our last few minutes here, we really just made a very important point. And it's one of the most important points that we're going, oh, there she goes again. B's just a term. It's Monday, and B is just, there it is. All right, now I've got to finish the last 6 minutes without cursing. And B put up the image, and I know it was you, B. Dr. B put up the image of Dr. Nora Volkow, whose very sight boils my blood. And so now I've got to sit
She
here for the
she
last.
looks she looks like a very disturbed
But I'm such an
individual.
honest person. Oh my goodness. Oh, was that an error that I did? Oh, shame on me. Bye.
See, this is why I bring my therapy dog. If you're going to show images of Dr. Nora Volkow, I will have my therapy dog with me. And she's with me right now. So I can, and I won't even look at the camera. I'm not even going to look at my phone. That woman, her image just boils my blood. She is the architect of the opioid crisis. She is the architect of the opioid crisis. She was in a position she could have prevented the whole thing. She's been in that position since May of 2003. She is the architect of the opioid crisis. All right, Travis, we got a couple of minutes left. I want to get back to this very important point because it's probably the single most important point that you and I can make, and you made it. And I want to go over it again. I agree with you. It is for most of these physicians, for most of these providers, these people who are drinking the Kool-Aid and eating the dog food of the brain disease model of addiction, it doesn't matter if we have 5 studies or 50 studies. Their cognitive bias is going to prevent them from advancing forward in knowledge. Travis, you said it yourself. Patients don't have cognitive bias. We can reach them. We can reach them.
And we will.
It's not our job to reach the providers. We will present the evidence, okay, but it's not our job to change their mind. Many of the patients, I feel, have been brainwashed. I don't know how you feel about the term brainwashed.
Well, I mean, they kind of did that to me in the beginning, to be honest with you, Doug. I mean, it's what they seem to do to everyone. I don't know if I'd use that word, if it's right for us to use that word, but they definitely lead you towards down the path of, okay, you have a mental problem, and you know, you're an addict, you're a drug addict, and that's something that you need to accept. And they'll even tell you that if you don't accept that, one of the first steps they'll tell you to do to getting clean, as they call it, is to accept that you're a drug addict. You have to accept that you're a drug addict. You have to accept that there's something mentally wrong with your brain. And then from that point, then you can get help with counseling, group therapies, and everything else. And that was one of the steps that was really, really hard for me. You know, I didn't want to admit that something mentally was wrong with me, because I knew that wasn't true. I just knew it wasn't true. They weren't in my position. I mean, it wasn't like I was running the street, you know, doing all sorts of kind of hard drugs. That's not what happened to me. I mean, it almost led to that point, but that's not what happened to me. I got sick. They put me on, you know, pain medicines, and then before I knew it, it was just out of control, and I was tumbling down, you know, fast down in this deep hole, and I didn't think I was ever going to get out of it. And there's millions of people that has had that same thing happen, you know, car wrecks, accidents, whatever it is. And then before they know it, they're on opioids from their doctor, and then 6 months down the road to a year, they're in a worse position than that, because they're like, man, this got out of hand real fast. And the lucky ones, you know, they can bounce back from it. I consider myself a lucky one. And the ones not so lucky, they end up in a coffin. I mean, and that's where I'm at with that, because, you know, I thank God every day, because I consider myself lucky. I consider myself to be lucky. I've seen a lot of people lose their lives over this, and, you know, they were here 1 minute and the next minute they were gone. It was that fast in the blink of an eye. And I know for a fact that most of the people I'm talking about, they weren't out here just running the streets doing street drugs, like mixing all this stuff. It didn't happen like that. They had a car accident. They had an accident on the job. They broke a bone, and you know, anything. And then the next thing they know, their doctor's writing them opioids, and not even a year later, it's out of control. And it was like falling in a rabbit hole, like a never-ending rabbit hole, just a bottomless pit. And then one day I just woke up and I was like, I need to get out of this pit. I have to get out of here. I'm in a dark place and I have to get out of this pit. And I just started climbing my way back out of it. But a lot of us are not as lucky to do so. Because of I believe now, because of the methylation in the blood, and because what it does to our DNA. You know, it like you said, it's like a house. It goes in there and it messes with the breakers, and your body's just not functioning properly. So, I mean, it's a lot to do with that. I don't believe that we're drug addicts and you know, that we're mentally insane or something mentally is wrong with us. I can't believe that anymore. I just can't. Not after seeing the science, not after seeing everything else. I can't believe that because it's not the truth.
Thank you, Travis. Chrissy's gonna looks like Chrissy's gonna come on, and we're out of time today. But I want to pick up on that point in our beginning of our next show, Travis. I don't want to leave that hanging. That was excellent words.
Okay, Dr. Smith, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Travis, Dr. Smith. Thank you, visitors, for joining in today with Live Talk with Dr. B. So we will see y'all tomorrow, every Monday through Thursday, 12:30 to 1. Have a great day.